To see what's going on is just very, very sad. You say, why didn't somebody call the FBI 36 years ago? I mean, you could also say, when did this all happen? What's going on? To take a man like this and besmirch. Now, with that being said, let her have her say, and let's see how it all works out. But I don't think you can delay it any longer. They've delayed it a week already.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Well, if Dr. Christine Blasey Ford does testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Republicans' biggest problem could be the optics. It so happens that every single Republican member on the committee is a white man, invoking the memorable images of Anita Hill being questioned, often disrespectfully, by an all-white male panel back in 1991 during the questioning of Kavanaugh and Ford, ideally a qualified woman litigator. But Ford doesn't want that. Instead, she prefers to be questioned by members of the committee, who, after all, were elected to do the job. Hanging over all of this, the midterms just weeks away. Republican strategists are worried about how Ford telling her story to the nation while she faces a diverse panel, including women and men and people of color on the Democratic side, and those Republican white guys on the other, could impact the election. The Washington Post spoke to two Republicans involved with campaign planning. And according to the Post, one of those Republicans said several top GOP lawmakers have told colleagues that they hope Ford declines to show up for the hearing, even as they issue statements urging her to do so, helping the GOP to avoid a risky televised drama and making it easier for Senate leaders to hold a vote next week. Joining me now, David Brock, founder of Media Matters, Maya Wiley of the News School, MSNBC contributor Charlie Sykes, Republican strategist Sarah Rumpf, and MSNBC political contributor Jason Johnson. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to my friends that are at the disadvantage in the remote location there. And Sarah, I'm going to start with you. As a young Republican woman, the optics of seeing a panel of all white men questioning this woman's account of a very painful experience for her versus a very diverse panel that will include Kamala Harris and Cory Booker and Mazie Hirono on the other side. Do you find that problematic as a young Republican woman?
I really don't. If we were suggesting that a female senator couldn't do this questioning because she'd be too emotional or involved, we'd call that sexist. And the idea that a Republican senator cannot treat this woman with respect and dignity just because he's a man, I find that problematic as well. Now, Kellyanne Conway, I have disagreed with her on a lot of things in the past year or so, but when she said that this woman needed to be treated seriously and with respect, those were good comments. And I do believe that even though they're men, that they're capable of being professional and asking these questions with respect.
Even though they've already they've pretty much said they've already made up their minds. They already don't believe her.
Well, you know, here's the thing. We have a long tradition in this country of having testimony in an adversarial context and be able to be handled professionally in even the most contentious court cases, both in the civil and criminal context. We have a long tradition of being able to confront your accuser. Susan Collins, Senator Susan Collins had a very good suggestion that we have Professor Ford testify. We also allow Professor Ford's attorney to question Judge Kavanaugh. I think that's a good balancing of allowing both of them to have their stories told. I mean, at this point, we have several decades past. There's no physical evidence. There's no photographs or video. What we have is two people who are telling stories that cannot both be accurate. So let's have them both tell their stories and let them both be questioned and let the senators who are on this committee decide what makes sense to them.
Oh, Jason,
that's the fairest way to move forward.
Well, first of all, this isn't a trial, so I don't think that they get to cross-examine each other with attorneys. But Jason Johnson, we have a long tradition of the criminal justice system also not working out so well for people who are marginalized, for people of color. And women in this situation are facing, the men on the panel have already decided that she is not telling the truth, or that she somehow, lost her mind and doesn't remember what happened. What do you make of the optics, just the way this is going to look next week if it happens?
It's going to look terrible, Joy. Look, first and foremost, for these 11 men, they're not even polite to Kamala Harris, and she's a colleague, okay? Yeah. So if they can't figure out how to be polite to someone who's actually on the committee with, if they're not able to be polite and responsible to somebody who's actually on the committee with them, they're not going to be able to be polite and responsible to someone who they're actually trying to question. And the problem is, and you've mentioned this is a job interview. It's not a trial. And if they treat it like a trial, they're going to look worse. And the fact that this is a white woman, right? If they were questioning a woman of color, this might play off differently, but they're going to be attacking a white woman for 6 to 7 hours on national television. It is not a good look for the Republican Party because they have white women who are currently running for Senate seats, and if this ends up being a question that they have to face in Arizona debates and they have to face in Tennessee debates, that's not going to be a good look for this party. So optically, this could not go any worse for them, and the longer they wait, the bigger impact it's going to have on the midterms.
And, you know, Charlie, you've already had a guy called Ralph Norman, a congressman called Ralph Norman in South Carolina, make a joke about this. Do we have that? We can play that. This is cut 8. Let's listen to Ralph Norman.
Do you think that any of these claims are legitimate?
No, I don't. I think this woman...
I'll just read what he said. Well, he said, I thought I was going to be late, he says in a joke. Did y'all hear the latest late-breaking news from the Kavanaugh hearings? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, he says, came out that she was groped by Abraham Lincoln. I thought I was going to have to go back there, but we won't. He made a joke about that. So you don't really have the most sensitivity going in the Republican Party, Charlie. And now they're going to be on display. They say they want to try to get a woman lawyer to do it because they are too afraid to do it themselves. So they're going to sit there mute?
Yeah, well, there's no question that there is an optics problem. You know, Sarah's right, though, that the real variable here is not necessarily gender. It's stupidity and it's insensitivity. And those comments, I think, have a high potential of having a backlash. Look, but, you know, both parties, I think, have to be aware of the optics here and the way that they handle the questioning. If, in fact, Republicans beat up on Dr. Ford, I think that would be a political disaster. But I also think that Democrats need to understand that if they go over the top in their questioning of Kavanaugh, if in fact they become, you know, histrionic, there's a potential there that there would be a backlash. What everybody has to do is approach this as soberly and fairly as possible, and that's so difficult to do with all of the emotions around it. So what could possibly go wrong? A lot can go wrong. I mean, you know, with Orrin Hatch and Chuck Grassley there, these guys who I think are really tone deaf on a lot of these issues, I think the potential for missteps is rather considerable. I
mean, tone deaf is kind of putting it mildly, right? I mean, these guys have already said they don't believe her. They've said the most important thing is to get this guy seated ASAP, that it's urgent to make it happen now. This is what Mazie Hirono, Senator Mazie Hirono, for a lot of people, if they say not all heroes wear capes, I think a cape might be being delivered to Mazie Hirono soon, because she keeps on doing really sort of making statements that are kind of mic drop statements in these hearings. Here's Mazie Hirono's message to men on Tuesday.
Guess who's perpetuating all of these kinds of actions? It's the men in this country. And I just want to say to the men in this country, just shut up and step up. Do the right thing for a change.
I mean, is that what would count as going too far? I mean, David, we were talking about before camera came on, before we came on to camera, that among the base of the Republican Party, there is at least a perception that these kinds of things don't matter. That people look at a Roy Moore and say, okay, is he going to vote my way on abortion? I don't care. And people look at what Kavanaugh's doing and they say, well, is he going to get rid of abortion? So, because other than that, I don't care. When you were inside the party, when this was you doing this, did you believe deep down that it didn't matter what Anita Hill said and that Clarence Thomas was right? Or was this just politics for you?
Well, it started with a belief in Thomas. So I wrote a book called The Real Anita Hill. I defended Clarence Thomas. I thought that was right. What happened to me was, in the 2 years subsequent, and that could happen in this case, more evidence came out that was quite contradictory, that was damning to Thomas. I didn't know about it. 2 years later, a book came out called Strange Justice. The women who didn't have their voice heard in the Anita Hill hearings had their voice heard in this book. Well, I went back to the people who sold me the bill of goods on Clarence Thomas. They told me, oh, they never believed their friend. These were stalwart defenders of Clarence Thomas. Oh, they knew it was all politics. So that's what it is. There's a mindset here which I grew up in, that the ends justifies the means.
Yeah.
And I compare the conservative movement. I'm not saying all conservatives, but we're talking about elite conservative circles in Washington, D.C. There's a mindset where you can lie to outsiders.
Right.
So when they're doing all this coaching in here, what people are losing sight of is what happened to Anita Hill was horrible. What's going to happen to Dr. Ford, I think, will be horrible. But the real issue is perjury. And Clarence Thomas is on this court. He perjured himself to get there. And Brett Kavanaugh is heading down that road if he's confirmed. And this is somebody who's going to administer and interpret the law of the land.
Yeah.
The standard has to be much higher here.
And I guess that's the point, you know, Maya, is that you have, you know, Republicans saying that when people make a statement like Mazie Hirono did, well, that's anti-men, you're going too far, you're making the Democrats look bad. But to who, right? Because at the same time, the prospect here is somebody who, a lot of members of the Senate have said that he lied about other stuff too. Yeah. And that he can get on this court, potentially having not told the truth in these hearings, also potentially being this kind of man, if you believe Dr. Ford. But then he gets to decide what is justice and what is law for the rest of us.
For a lifetime.
For the rest of his life.
For a lifetime.
What are we co-signing here?
I think we are co-signing a sexist form of politics that ignores that more than half of this country is actually female. And by the way, men are also subject to sexual violence, and we shouldn't forget that.
We've seen men in that hashtag why I didn't report as well.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely.
In fact, and we know people underreport. But the point about the highest court in the land, the point about the credibility and the importance of who sits in that seat from the standpoint of what kind of character they have is as important as the other aspects. And if at some point our leaders don't recognize that the primary job here of leadership is making sure we are one country, that we are a united people, and that we protect each other, I don't know what we have left.
Well, and I'll come back to you on that, Sarah, because it doesn't bother you at all, you know, as a woman, as a young woman, that the sort of the message that the party is sending writ large with a Roy Moore nomination, or with this defending Kavanaugh to the hilt and immediately dismissing what Judge Ford said, and even trying to frame another guy in one case of a gentleman who's now taken it back and apologized for it. Does this not bother you just as a woman, a young woman in the Republican Party? That this is the message that's being sent to you.
Right. I think we need to draw a very important distinction. I mean, I've criticized on your program some of the things that Donald Trump has said and done. When the Access Hollywood came out, I flat out said that the Republicans that were continuing to support him were, in essence, endorsing sexual assault, because that's what he was admitting to on the Access Hollywood tape.
But the majority of women in your party,
they
did vote for him.
What Donald Trump said and did is abhorrent. Roy Moore, we had multiple examples of abhorrent behavior from him. I'm glad he lost his Senate race in Alabama. What we have here with Judge Kavanaugh is one person's story that he adamantly denies, and the other person that she says was in the room at the time also denies it.
But do you believe her? Do you believe her?
I believe that something traumatic happened to her. I believe that I don't think that she is lying. I don't think that she is intentionally trying to mislead anybody, but I haven't heard her speak. We've seen written testimony, written letter from her.
She'll probably say what was in the letter. Do you believe that something traumatic happened to her at the hands of Brett Kavanaugh?
I want to hear from her. There is something to be said for being able to hear someone speak in their own words.
Let's say she says exactly what was in the letter. Will you believe it? Will you believe if she repeats exactly what was in her letter?
Until I see her speak, being willing to speak under oath in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I think that there's a reason that we set our court system up this way, because
not a court. It's not
there's
a court.
something there. But it's a similar kind of setup. I want to hear from someone in their own words. I don't think that we have enough. I would not derail Kavanaugh's nomination if she's not willing to come and speak forward. Just on a letter alone, I don't think is enough. In a lot of these other cases, Bill O'Reilly, Anthony Weiner, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein.
They didn't do it.
The second we had multiple
we didn't have all the women
accusations.
And there were investigations.
And there was investigations.
Do you support the requirement that there be a reopening of the background check in order to talk to the witnesses who say that, for instance, everyone was talking about it after the incident?
Right, right.
The woman who said that, I think on Facebook or Twitter, has already retracted that. And, you know, the idea that we're going to convict somebody because there was gossip at a high school 30 years ago that he drank, you know, again, this is a lot. This is a lot.
Okay, I think Jason was trying to jump in, Jason.
Yeah, I got to say this. I'm offended as a man. Okay, she was accused of sexual assault, and the man's going to be a judge. And let's remember, this is not just what he was doing in high school, because he was drinking underage, which is against the law, and he's supposed to be, you know, soon to be one of the most important judges in the land. But also, you've got to look at what he did when he was in college, and the organizations he was in, and their no means yes, and yes means whatever. I mean, it's not like this is a one-time incident. And I'm so sick and tired of these arguments, well, there's got to be other people. So I get what? So you're not really a murderer if you killed one person? You got to kill 5 before you consider you a murderer? If you grabbed a woman, held her down, put your hand over her mouth, and turned up the music, that is a problem. So what I'm saying is this notion that this is going to be derailed, that this is problematic, or that we have to wait for some sort of public performance in order to believe this woman could all be solved if there was actually an FBI investigation, which this president and the Republicans on the committee refused to do. And I remember a time, crazy as it may seem, where a man like this, who brings this much trouble and this much problems and this sort of attack on integrity to the Supreme Court, would just withdraw.
Yeah.
And I think eventually, if he cares about this country and he cares about the institution, that's what he should end up doing.
Sarah?
Well, look, there's just so much to unpack here. There is a very real possibility that Brett Kavanaugh did nothing wrong. I think it's entirely, again, I think that something traumatic happened to her, but it's entirely possible that there is a case of mistaken identity. And again, the fact that we're, you know, that we're going to make these accusations that he's some kind of horrible person without having his accuser come forward, I think that's too far.
Let me,
you know,
Could I weigh in on this?
Yes, please, Charlie.
Well, I mean, you know, a couple of things. Number one, you know, we do have to hear from these individuals in order to make up our minds. I think that's legitimate. Number two, you know, look, there is no such thing as collective guilt. You know, you asked before about the senator who said that men should shut up. You know, I'm sorry, that is going too far, because a lot of men, I think, do need to be heard as well. And again, this is not collective guilt. It is Brett Kavanaugh. Either he did this or he did not do this. This is a factual situation, which is why it is a good idea to reopen the FBI background check. That's why it is a good idea to bring in the alleged eyewitness in this case and put him under oath, Mark Judge, in order to determine that. See, part of the problem is to get ahead of the evidence that we actually had. If, in fact, this was not a one-off, I would like to hear the evidence of that. So, I mean, this is, again, where I'm trying to say, you know, can we at least stick to the facts as we know it? And that's why I think it's going to be very important to hear what Dr. Ford has to say, and she needs to be treated very, very seriously. And I don't understand how Republicans who claim to take this seriously do not support asking the FBI to open up the background check.
Yeah.
This is what they do, and they do it very well.
That's what they do. Okay, I want to add one more person to this panel, because I mean, and I want to keep everybody here, please, if you could. And I'm going to add religious reform activist Frank Schaeffer. We're going to add you to. You've been listening to this discussion, Frank. And I mean, do you understand? Can you explain for those who don't understand why it is that people, even if they think something bad happened to this woman, would still want Kavanaugh on the court no matter what? Because a lot of people, I think that's what's bothering a lot of people. They don't understand why part of the base of the party is so determined to have this seat. You know, they held it open for almost a year to get this, you know, to get all the seats, you know. Why?
Well, the fact of the matter is you have to go back a little bit and look at the history of this. My father, Francis Schaeffer, in the 1970s and 80s, along with me as his nepotistic sidekick and people like C. Everett Koop, started something called the evangelical wing of the pro-life movement with a film series called Whatever Happened to the Human Race. Fast forward to the present time, I can literally say this. I think the evangelical white voter in this country has become two things. First of all, been driven mad by the issue of abortion. It has become so much of an obsession with part of this group that they would do anything, including sanctifying a guy like Roy Moore, an alleged pedophile, now sanctifying an alleged attempted rapist. So that's point one. Point two, the evangelical group itself has moved so far to the right that it literally is more like a Trump cult now, that you would find something in North Korea or whatever supporting their leader, than a political movement in the American sense of the word. I don't think people understand that. And I just want to add as a little footnote that there are some former evangelicals like me, former in that we've been kicked out, as it were, not because we've lost faith in Jesus, but we have lost faith in the Republican Party, who have formed a group called Vote Common Good. And we're going on a bus tour to 35 cities, working with 35 Democratic candidates, trying to flip the Congress, not because we're even Republicans. We are trying to save this country from going any further down this path of this cult, this abortion-obsessed cult that will take anyone and even badmouth someone like Dr. Ford before even hearing her, who has been sexually assaulted, rather than vote for a Supreme Court justice who might not do everything in the litmus test the Republicans want. It just makes no sense unless you understand this Trump cult is no longer really an American political party in the classic sense we mean it. And that's the point I would like to make.
Well, and to that point, David, you know, just when we were talking about it, you used the same word, right?
Yes.
There's something cultish about the sort of affinity. Right. But Republicans have an entire long list from the Federalist Society of people who would vote the exact same way on Roe, presumably, and say the magic word stare decisis and claim they won't, and then get on the court and do it, right?
Sure.
They could pick any one off of that. Why? But they're hanging on to this guy, and there feels like there's something more. There's abortion, but there's also the idea that this man may not be denigrated, that we must not allow him to be denigrated. Is that familiar to you, or am I off base there?
Sure, no, I think that's right. And I think that, you know, you've seen in the polls, as you cited earlier, that he's the most unpopular nominee, I guess, in history.
Yeah.
But he's popular among the Republicans still. And so what you're going to see here is they want to stick with this, and they want to get it jammed through. But what's going to happen is, if they don't, it's going to depress their turnout. It's going to be demoralized, because the Trump brand is winning. If he gets a black eye here, you'll see it'll depress their
Even
turnout.
if he withdrew him, or if this man withdrew and he put a different evangelical person who would overturn Roe on, wouldn't matter?
No, I think it won't matter. I think if a loss is a loss, and it will depress their base. You see stories about the evangelical right thinking about maybe sitting out the midterms if this doesn't go through. So they are very, very invested in this, and they do not want to see Democrats bring him down.
And do you feel that way, Sarah, that this is partly about not allowing Democrats to take this man down?
I mean, I do think that in some way, but, you know, if just, we've got to admit objectively, with the evidence that we have right now, one statement from her, a statement from Mark Judge, a statement from Judge Kavanaugh, these are in conflict. The guys say it didn't happen. She says it did. There's a possibility that Judge Kavanaugh is absolutely innocent. And if we're going to be moving forward with confirmation hearings, regardless whether it's Democrats or Republicans in charge, whoever's up for nominations, I would hope that one accusation, if someone is not willing to come forward, that one accusation for a witness that won't come forward would not be enough to derail somebody's career. She should come forward. She should be treated with respect. She should tell her side of the story. They can question Judge Kavanaugh again, and the Senate can make a judgment. That's fair.
Maya's trying to jump in here.
So, Sarah, where I absolutely agree with you is that there should be a fair process, and that all parties to the process should get the full fairness of a neutral investigation. The problem with this is it's a setup. The reason Dr. Ford has already said that she wanted to come before the committee would. The issue isn't her willingness. The issue is the fact that it's a setup, and by the virtue of not providing a neutral, which is what the FBI would do, a politically neutral investigation to determine whether or not there are additional facts that would shed light.
Or witnesses.
And, well, that's part of the
Right.
fact pattern, right, is witnesses, is essentially to say, we're going to say that we're giving you an opportunity, but we're actually setting you up. And all that we're setting you up for is our ability to have plausible deniability about whether we were just trying to ram through our political nomination rather than giving full, fair hearing to whether or not something awful happened here.
And Jason, it does feel like the rush is the other story here, that there seems to be this urgency that it has to be done ASAP. And which is unusual because they set the deadline. It doesn't have to be Wednesday. What do you make of the speed with which Republicans are trying to do this?
So my thoughts about this, Joy, they've really evolved throughout the week. I mean, we've seen this rush all along, right? And the rush is because of the Russians. They basically want Kavanaugh on the court in case this investigation goes further, and they want someone who will say the president can pardon himself. That's where this rush really comes from. But we've seen it all along where they had the documents, and now they don't want to do this, and now they don't want to do that. The problem that the Republicans face is this. The longer they wait to actually vote and determine as to whether or not Kavanaugh can be confirmed, the closer it becomes an impact on Senate races that are happening across the country. That is what they're so terrified of. That's why they want to rush this through. But the problem is this. The longer they wait and the more of these conflicts they go through, the more people end up paying attention. I also think this, quiet as kept. It doesn't matter that Mitch McConnell yesterday said, yeah, we've got the votes. I don't think they've got the votes. At the end of the day, look, the Republicans have the lead in the Senate right now. They could have a vote next Thursday. The only reason they're even having these delays is because they're worried about Jeff Flake, they're worried about Murkowski, they're worried about Corker. They don't have the votes, and they're hoping if they can take this woman down publicly and make her look foolish or make her look less credible, it will give cover for Republicans to actually vote for her. So that's the danger. And honestly, if this doesn't end up being done by the 1st of October, I think he's going to drop out. I think you're going to have people ask him to drop out, and they won't even have the vote because pushing him through this late will be dangerous.
Well, interesting. And Frank Schaeffer, let me come back to you.
She's got to show up, though.
We'll see what happens. And she has not, by the way, we should just factor in, she has not said she won't, right? They're just trying to negotiate when she can get there. But really, I'm going to come back to you in a second, Charlie, but I want to go to Frank on this really quickly because that is the other issue, right? That if, for instance, Republicans were to succeed and just jam him onto the court and whatever, to deal with the optics, get him onto the court, and then more information came out, just the way that David described happened with Clarence Thomas, where 3 more women, it turned out, were backing up the story. And now, when people think about Clarence Thomas, at least if you're not a hardcore Republican, there's an asterisk on him that stays on him. It doesn't go away. No one's forgotten about that testimony of Anita Hill. What happens with evangelicals if now you have two out of 9 members of the Supreme Court, 2 out of the 5 men, have this kind of cloud over them, and they're both conservative, they're both Republicans? Does the base feel uncomfortable with that?
Yeah, there are evangelical white women voters who voted for Trump who will not vote for a Democrat under any circumstances except one, when they really get the idea that they are being abused wholesale as women. And you have to understand something. The Republican Party is starting to look like the party of misogyny, abuse, fondling, groping. That's who the president is. And we know that. And so this illness of denying all your morality, the so-called family values base that the evangelicals said they represented, and wholesale defending people like Kavanaugh, Roy Moore, Donald Trump himself is going to peel people away. And I say again, that's why someone like myself is hopeful going on the road with Vote Common Good, that we can appeal to this and just say, hey, listen, there has to be somebody left who still actually is trying to follow Jesus and not Donald Trump. There has to be someone left in this Christian group who is interested in the integrity and the morality and the